The phone rang at 1 in the morning, lighting up the darkness with a name that belonged to a grave. It was my daughter. My dead daughter. 3 days later. My living children used that moment to claim I was incompetent and quietly removed me from the family will. They thought I was breaking down. They have no idea I have been preparing for this war for years. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 58 years old, though my joints feel older when the rain comes down on the slate roof of my empty house in Blackwood Ridge. It is a quiet place, the kind of suburban fortress where neighbours smile but never ask questions. That suits me fine. After 30 years managing sensitive data and high-pressure personnel at the Sterling Holloway Institute, I have lost the appetite for idle chatter. My husband, Robert, has been gone for 5 years. My daughter, Emily, has been gone for 7. The house is a mausoleum of dust-free surfaces and silence. My life is a grid of disciplined routines. I wake at 6. I drink coffee, black, at the kitchen island while looking out at the manicured lawn. I pay bills the day they arrive. I do not let grief make me messy. Grief is a cold companion. But I have learned to look it in the eye without blinking. Most people think I have moved on. My surviving children, Mark and Jessica, certainly think so. They visit on holidays with their forced smiles and wandering eyes, calculating the value of the antique furniture. They do not mention Emily. To them, she is a closed chapter, an uncomfortable tragedy best left in the dark. But the dark has a way of speaking back. It happened at exactly 1 in the morning. I was asleep, dreaming of nothing, when the vibration against the mahogany nightstand pulled me into the waking world. The room was pitch black, save for the aggressive blue light of the smartphone screen. I reached for it, my glasses fumbling onto the bridge of my nose, my eyes adjusted. The breath caught in my throat like a shard of glass. The name on the screen was Emily. My thumb hovered over the glass. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This was impossible. We had disconnected her line 6 years ago. We had buried her phone with her. A sentimental gesture that now felt like a grotesque mistake. Logic told me to decline. Logic told me it was a glitch, a spoofed number, a cruel technological hiccup. I slid the bar to answer. I pressed the phone to my ear. My hand trembling so hard, the device rattled against my earring. "Hello?" I whispered. The word felt heavy in the thick air. There was no static. The line was crystal clear, yet terrifyingly empty. Then, I heard it. A sharp intake of breath. It was the sound of someone trying to speak through a throat constricted by fear or pain. "Emily, is that you? Please," I begged, my voice cracking. A whisper crawled through the speaker, low and hurried. It was not a recording. It was too wet, too immediate. "Mum? Listen to me. Check the red file." Then the line went dead. I sat up in bed, the phone still pressed to my cheek, the silence of the room rushing back in to drown me. I did not scream. I did not call the police. I did not call Mark or Jessica. Years of working in classified administration had forged a steel core inside me. Panic was useless. Data was everything. I turned on the bedside lamp. I opened the drawer and took out a black leather notebook. My hand was steady now, though my stomach churned with ice-cold nausea. I wrote down the details. Date October 14th. Time 1 a.m. Caller ID Emily Vance. Message, check the red file. This was not the first anomaly. There had been the email draft that appeared on my laptop last month. Written in her style, only to vanish before I could screenshot it. There had been the motion sensor in the hallway, triggering at 3 in the morning for 3 nights in a row. I had dismissed them as the hallucinations of a grieving mother or the quirks of an old house. But a phone call was different. A voice was different. I stared at the phone, now dark and innocent on the nightstand. Was this a hack or someone trying to drive me insane? My children had been pushing for me to sell the house, to move into an assisted living facility where I would be safe. Gaslighting was a strategy I had seen used in corporate boardrooms, but surely not by my own flesh and blood. Or perhaps it was something else. Perhaps the technology itself was haunting me. I closed the notebook and placed it back in the drawer. I lay back down, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sun to rise. I would not sleep again. The fear began to recede, replaced by a cold, sharp suspicion. If the dead can call, what are the living hiding? Mark and Jessica arrived at my doorstep 72 hours later. They did not come with casseroles or flowers. They came with briefcases. Mark, my eldest, wore a suit that cost more than my first car. He is a partner at a venture capital firm in the city, a man who has optimized his life into a series of calendar notifications and quarterly goals. He kissed my cheek, but his eyes were already scanning the hallway, looking for dust, looking for decay. Jessica followed him. She is 2 years younger than Mark, a real estate broker who sells lifestyle illusions to people who cannot afford them. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her makeup flawless, her expression a practiced mask of filial concern. We sat in the living room. They did not accept the tea I offered. Mom, we need to talk. Jessica started, placing her hand over mine. Her skin felt cool and dry. Mark and I have been talking. We are worried about you. I sat back in my armchair, folding my hands in my lap. I kept my face neutral. Worried about what? Mark cleared his throat and opened a leather folder. He pulled out a document, sliding it across the coffee table. It was thick, bound with a heavy staple. The phone call. Mom, Mark said, his voice dropping an octave to sound authoritative. You told Aunt Sarah that Emily called you at 1 in the morning? I had made the mistake of confiding in my sister, forgetting that Sarah had never been able to keep a secret in her life. The information travelled fast in this family. It was a vivid dream. I lied calmly. I was disoriented. A vivid dream where you logged the exact time and call duration, Jessica countered, her voice soft, like she was speaking to a frightened child. Mum, we spoke to Dr. Holloway. Given your history of repressed trauma, and now these hallucinations, we think it is time to take precautions. I looked at the document. The header read, Temporary Conservatorship and Asset Management Transfer. What is this? I asked. It is just a safety net, Mark said quickly, tapping the paper with a manicured finger. It activates the clause in Dad's trust. Since you are demonstrating signs of cognitive decline, the estate management shifts to us, temporarily, just until you are feeling better. My heart rate did not spike. My breathing remained even. I recognized this tactic. In the corporate world, it is called a hostile takeover disguised as a merger. They were using soft words to strip me of my autonomy. Cognitive decline, I repeated, because I answered a phone call. Because you think dead people are contacting you, Mark snapped, his patience fraying. Mom, look at this house. It is too big. You are alone. You are hearing voices. We cannot let you manage the portfolio in this state. There are substantial assets at risk. $3 million in liquid investments alone. We are doing this because we love you, Jessica added, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears that looked remarkably rehearsed. We do not want you to make a mistake you cannot fix. This just gives us the power to sign checks and manage the properties. You can relax. I picked up the document. I read the clauses. They were thorough. They had likely been planning this for months, waiting for a slip-up. The phone call was just the catalyst they needed to pull the trigger. If I fought them now, they would drag me into court. They would put me on the stand and ask me about the voice of my dead daughter. They would paint me as a senile, grieving widow losing her grip on reality. I would lose everything, including my freedom. But if I signed, they would think I was defeated. They would think I was weak. And arrogance makes people careless. I looked at Mark, then at Jessica. I saw the greed hidden behind their concern. I saw the relief in their eyes as they realized I was not screaming. Where do I sign? I asked quietly. Mark blinked, surprised by my surrender. He pulled a silver pen from his pocket and clicked it. Right there. On the last page. I took the pen. I did not shake. I signed Eleanor Vance in clear, steady cursive. I handed the paper back to my son. Thank you, Mum. Jessica breathed out, squeezing my shoulder. You will see. This is for the best. I watched them pack away my rights into a leather briefcase. They thought they had just secured their inheritance. They had no idea they had just signed their own sentences. I was not losing my mind. I was just beginning to use it. The silence returned after Mark and Jessica left, but it felt heavier now, charged with the static of betrayal. I sat in the dim light of the study, staring at the empty spot on the wall where a family portrait used to hang. Mark had taken it, claiming he wanted to digitize it for posterity. I knew he just wanted to appraise the frame. My mind drifted back, fighting against the current of time to find Emily. She was always the outlier. While Mark and Jessica inherited their father's charm and his ruthlessness, Emily had inherited my curiosity. She was the only one who looked at our family and saw the cracks in the foundation. Mark saw a dynasty. Jessica saw a bank account. Emily saw a cage. I remembered a rainy afternoon 8 years ago. I was still working at the Institute then, managing the archival logs for the Delta Project, a discrete behavioral study that officially did not exist. I had brought some files home, a breach of protocol I never committed, except that one time. Emily had found me crying in the kitchen, overwhelmed by the pressure and Robert's declining health. She had hugged me, her grip fierce and protective. Mum, why do you let them treat you like this? She had asked, her voice trembling with an anger she usually kept hidden. Mark, he talks about your retirement fund like it is his inheritance already. And Dad, he just lets them. They are your siblings. Emily? I had replied, wiping my eyes. They love us in their own way. No, they don't. She had whispered, pulling back to look me in the eye. They love what you can give them. There is a difference. That was the thing about Emily. She saw the truth we were all too polite to speak. When she died a year later, the police called it a tragic accident. They said she lost control of her car on the winding coastal road at 2 a.m. They said she must have been tired. Case closed. I had accepted it. I was a mother with a hole in her chest where her heart used to be. I nodded at the officers. I signed the papers. I let Mark handle the funeral arrangements. I let Jessica choose the flowers. I retreated into my grief. silencing the small, nagging voice in the back of my head that asked why an insomniac like Emily would fall asleep at the wheel. I blamed myself for not protecting her, but I blamed myself for the wrong things. I thought I had failed to be a mother. I did not realize I had failed to be a witness. The phone call at 1 a.m. had shattered that paralysis. Check the red file. The words echoed in the empty room. It was not just a directive. It was a memory. The red file was our inside joke from her teenage years, a term she used for her diary. But as she grew older, and as she became more suspicious of her siblings' financial maneuverings, the meaning had shifted. I remembered the last time we spoke before the accident. She was agitated, pacing around this very room. "Mom, people lie," she had said, her eyes darting to the door to make sure we were alone. But data doesn't. Evidence is not in the papers they show you. It is in the shadows. It is in the backups they think they destroyed. She had handed me a small, silver key that day. At the time, I thought it was just another trinket. She told me to keep it safe, just in case she ever got locked out. I had tucked it away and forgotten it, buried under layers of mourning. I stood up, my knees popping. I walked to the closet in the hallway, the one filled with old coats and winter boots that had not seen snow in years. I pushed aside a heavy wool trench coat and knelt down. Behind a stack of shoeboxes sat a small, fireproof safe. It was the one Robert had bought 20 years ago and never used. I had never opened it. I never had a reason to. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small silver key I had retrieved from my jewelry box earlier that morning. It felt cold against my skin. My hand shook, but not from fear. It shook with a sudden, clarity-inducing rage. Mark and Jessica thought they had stripped me of my power. They thought the temporary conservatorship gave them the keys to the kingdom. They did not know about the kingdom Emily had built in the dark. I inserted the key. It turned with a smooth, satisfying click. I pulled the heavy door open. Inside, there was no money. There were no jewels. There was only a single, red, external hard drive, resting on a bed of velvet. I reached out and wrapped my fingers around it. It was cold, heavy, and silent. But as I held it, I felt a vibration run up my arm, a phantom connection to the daughter who had died trying to warn me. "Okay, Emily," I whispered to the empty house. "Let's see what you found." I spent the next 3 nights living a double life. By day, I was the frail, confused widow Mark and Jessica needed me to be. I nodded vaguely when they spoke about assisted living facilities. I let my hands tremble when I poured tea. I asked the same question twice in 10 minutes, just to watch the smug satisfaction settle in their eyes. But by night, the moment their cars pulled away and the heavy oak door clicked shut, I became someone else. I became the woman who had managed sensitive intelligence for 30 years. I set up a workspace in the basement, away from the windows. I connected the red hard drive to an air-gapped laptop, a machine I had kept from my days at the institute, one that had never touched the internet. The drive was a labyrinth. Emily had organized it not like a diary, but like a forensic audit. There were folders labeled by year, going back over a decade. I opened a file dated 5 years ago. My breath hitched. It was a bank statement, but not one I had ever seen. It showed a transfer of $50,000 from the family's primary holding account to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. I recognized the date. It was the week Robert had his first stroke. While I was sitting by his hospital bed, holding his hand and praying for his life. My son had been moving assets offshore. I dug deeper. The corruption was not sporadic, it was structural. Jessica had been charging the estate consulting fees for property maintenance on houses we had sold years ago. Mark had leveraged the family portfolio to cover bad bets in his venture capital firm. But the most chilling discovery was a document titled The Contingency Trust. I read the legal jargon until my eyes burned. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. They had restructured the family trust so that upon Robert's death, I became a beneficiary in name only. The control had silently shifted to a board of trustees consisting of Mark, Jessica, and a lawyer I did not know. The clause for my removal was simple: any sign of incapacity. They had not just reacted to the phone call, they had been waiting for it. They had been waiting for me to slip, to age, to break. I was not a mother to them. I was an obstacle to be liquidated. At exactly 1 a.m, the phone rang. I was expecting it this time. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard focus. I picked up the device. "I am listening," I said into the darkness. The breathing on the other end was ragged, wet, and laboured. It sounded like someone trying to speak with lungs full of water. "Mom." The code. The voice wheezed, the static crackling around the words like interference from another world. 0, 9, 2, 1, 8, 8. I wrote the numbers on the legal pad in front of me. Is that all I asked? My voice steady, despite the pounding in my chest. "Do not trust the lawyer." The line went dead. I looked at the sequence of numbers. 0, 9, 2, 1, 8, 8. It was not a random string. It was the date I had started my job at the Institute, September 21st, 1988. Emily knew everything. Even in death, she knew the landmarks of my life better than the children who were still breathing. I turned back to the laptop. There was one folder on the drive I had not been able to open. It was labelled simply, "The Insurance." I clicked on it. A password prompt appeared. I typed in the numbers. The folder unlocked. It was not financial data. It was audio. Dozens of recordings. I clicked the first one. It was Mark's voice, clear and arrogant, recorded in this very house. "She is not going to last another 5 years. Jess, we need to accelerate the timeline. If we declare her incompetent, we can bypass the probate entirely." I listened to the next one, then the next. It was hours of conversation, a catalogue of their cruelty. They mocked my grief. They laughed about how easy it was to trick me into signing papers. They discussed my potential institutionalization as a logistical hurdle, like moving a piece of furniture. I sat in the cold basement, the blue light of the screen illuminating my face. I did not weep. The time for tears had passed. A strange calm settled over me, the kind of calm that comes before a controlled demolition. They had spent years building a cage for me, thinking I was a confused old woman who would go quietly into the night. They had forgotten who I was before I was their mother. I closed the laptop. I took a sip of my cold coffee. I began to formulate a timeline. I needed a lawyer who was not in their pocket. I needed a forensic accountant. And I needed to maintain the illusion of my own demise for just a little longer. They think I am weak because I am silent. I reached back into the past to find the weapons I needed for the future. 30 years in high-level administration teaches you that loyalty is rare, but professional curiosity is eternal. I did not use my home phone. I bought a prepaid burner phone from a convenience store 3 towns over, paying in cash. I dialed a number I had memorized 2 decades ago. Julian, I asked when the line connected. Eleanor, the voice answered instantly, smooth and devoid of surprise. Julian was a forensic accountant who had once helped the Institute trace a leak of funding that had vanished into thin air. He was retired now, but men like Julian never truly stop hunting. I heard you were retiring. I am not retiring, I said, my voice low and firm. I am being erased. I need you to look at something. We met in the back of a dusty library in the city, far from the prying eyes of my neighbours. I handed him a flash drive containing a copy of Emily's data. He did not ask how I got it. He simply nodded, his eyes already scanning the physical documents I had printed out. This is not just mismanagement. Eleanor, he said, tapping a spreadsheet. This is systematic embezzlement disguised as estate planning. They are using your husband's trust to wash money from their own failing ventures. If the IRS sees this, you go to prison. You are the signatory. I know, I replied. That is why I need you to prepare the counter-strike. I need everything documented, every penny, every timestamp. It will take a week, he said. You have 3 days. I returned home and resumed my performance. It was a role I played with increasing ease. When Mark came by to collect the weekly mail, I made sure to leave my reading glasses in the refrigerator. When Jessica called to check in, I pretended to confuse her with her aunt. Mum, are you sure you took your medication today? Jessica asked over the phone, her voice dripping with that suffocating, patronizing sweetness. I think so, I stammered, letting a slight tremor enter my voice. The blue ones, or the white ones, I can never remember which is for the blood pressure. It is okay. Mum, she sighed, clearly annoyed. We will handle it. Just don't touch any important papers. Okay. They were getting sloppy. Their arrogance was making them lazy. Mark left his laptop open on the kitchen island while he went to the bathroom. Jessica left a trail of invoices on the coffee table. They spoke freely in front of me, discussing liquidating the bond portfolio, as if I were a piece of furniture that could not hear. They assumed my silence was senility. They did not realize it was data collection. I spent my nights analyzing the findings Julian sent to my secure email. The scale of their betrayal was breathtaking. Mark had leveraged the house my house to cover a massive margin call. Jessica had been funneling maintenance fees into a shell company registered in her boyfriend's name. They had stripped the family assets down to the bone, leaving just enough to keep the lights on until I died. Then came the third call. It was exactly 1 a.m. The phone lit up the dark room. Emily? I did not flinch. I did not tremble. I picked it up with a steady hand. I am ready, I whispered. The static on the line was different this time. It was not heavy or oppressive. It sounded almost like a sigh of relief. Do it. Mom, do it now. The voice was faint, fading into the ether, but the message was clear. It was not a haunting. It was a permission slip. I hung up the phone. I opened my laptop. I had drafted the email days ago. It was addressed to the board of directors at Mark's firm, the licensing board for Jessica's real estate practice, and the state district attorney's office. Attached were 300 pages of forensic accounting, audio logs, and signed affidavits prepared by Julian. I looked at the clock. It was 1:10 a.m. I did not send it immediately. I wanted them to wake up to it. I wanted their phones to start ringing while they were pouring their morning coffee, thinking they were the masters of the universe. I clicked the settings icon. I set the delivery time for 8 o'clock in the morning. I closed the laptop and placed it back in the safe. I walked to the window and looked out at the sleeping suburb. The streetlights hummed. The world was quiet. But in a few hours, the noise would be deafening. They think I am weak because I am silent. They are about to learn that silence is just the sound of a fuse burning down. The morning began with a courier delivering a heavy envelope. Inside was a formal notice from the bank. My credit cards had been cancelled. My access to the joint checking account was revoked. Mark and Jessica had moved fast, cementing their control before the ink on the conservatorship papers was even dry. A small article had appeared in the Blackwood Gazette on page 4, titled, "Local Philanthropist Family in Legal Dispute." It was vague, planting the seed that I was the problem, the eccentric widow who needed managing. I sat at the kitchen island, sipping my coffee. I did not call the bank. I did not call the lawyer they had appointed for me. I watched the second hand on the wall clock sweep past the 12. It was exactly 8 o'clock in the morning. Somewhere in the digital cloud, a server processed my command. The emails I had queued the night before were released. They landed simultaneously in the inboxes of the senior partners at Mark's venture capital firm, the state ethics board, and the compliance officer at the bank Jessica used for her shell companies. The silence in my house remained absolute, but I knew the noise outside was beginning to build. At 8:30, my burner phone buzzed. It was Julian. "It is done," he said simply. The first read receipts just came in. Mark's compliance officer opened the attachment 2 minutes ago. "Good," I replied. Now we wait. By 9 o'clock, the invisible shockwave hit. I imagined the scene at Mark's office. The sudden summons to the conference room. The security guards waiting by his desk with a cardboard box. The realization that the discrepancies in his ledger were not just numbers, but prison sentences. My tablet, which I had kept connected to a separate network, pinged with an alert. A hold had been placed on the main family trust. Then another alert. The offshore accounts, the ones they thought were invisible, were frozen, pending a federal investigation. Julian's work was precise. He had not just exposed them, he had paralyzed them. At 9:45, the first cracks appeared in their alliance. I had access to their shared cloud drive, thanks to Emily's old passwords which they had never bothered to change. I saw a flurry of frantic messages appear in their private chat. "Mark, did you authorize the transfer from the Cayman account? The feds just froze my operating capital. Jessica, I didn't touch it. My broker just called me. He says there is a hold on my license. Mark, what did you do? Mark me. This is your sloppy bookkeeping. You said Mum was handled, Jessica. She is handled. She is sitting at home watching TV. This has to be a mistake. Or you tried to cut me out and triggered an audit. They were eating each other alive. It was the natural order of predators when the food runs out. They assumed I was the prey, unaware that I was the hunter who had baited the trap. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the pristine floor. I poured a second cup of coffee. I felt a strange lightness in my chest, a feeling I had not experienced since before Emily died. It was justice. At 10:15, my landline rang. It was not the polite ring of a social call. It was insistent, angry. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. Finally, at 10:30, my cell phone, the one they monitored, the one they thought was my only lifeline, lit up. It was Mark. I let it ring 4 times before sliding the bar to answer. I put on my best performance, my voice trembling slightly. Hello, Mark. Is everything all right, Mom? Mom, listen to me. Mark's voice came through the speaker. He was breathless, panic stripping away his usual polished baritone. Mom? Did you talk to anyone? Did you send anything to the partners? Send anything? I don't understand. Mark, I don't even know how to use the scanner properly. You know that. Mom, please. He stammered, the sound of a desperate man realizing the walls were closing in. There has been a misunderstanding, a terrible mistake at the bank. They froze everything. Mom, I need you to call the bank, right now. You have to tell them you authorized the transfers. You have to tell them it was a gift. Please. If you don't, I could lose everything. I held the phone away from my ear for a second, looking at it with cold detachment. He was begging. The son who had looked me in the eye 3 days ago and told me I was incompetent was now begging for me to save him. I don't know. Mark, I said slowly. I am feeling very confused today. Maybe I should wait for the doctor. No doctors, he screamed, his voice cracking. Mom, please, just do this for me. I am your son. I hung up the phone. The house was silent again, but the air felt cleaner. The war had officially begun. The conference room at the downtown law firm was cold, sterilized by air conditioning and the scent of expensive leather. Mark and Jessica sat on one side of the long mahogany table, looking like cornered animals. Their lawyers whispered frantically in their ears. But my children were not listening. They were staring at me. I did not sit in the wheelchair they had provided for my comfort. I stood at the head of the table, my spine straight, my hands resting on the back of the chair. The frail, confused widow of Blackwood Ridge had vanished. In her place stood the woman who had once navigated the treacherous currents of classified intelligence. Mom, please sit down, Jessica said, her voice trembling. You are making a scene. We can fix this if you just sign the retraction. I looked at her. I did not blink. There is nothing to fix. Jessica, I said, my voice clear and steady. The damage is done. The files are with the district attorney. They are with the ethics board. They are with the IRS. Mark slammed his hand on the table. You have no idea what you have done. You just destroyed the family legacy over a hallucination, over a phone call. It was not a hallucination, I replied. I slid the red hard drive across the polished wood. It spun slowly and came to a stop in front of Mark. You thought Emily was the weak one, I continued, my gaze moving between them. You thought she was just the quiet, artistic sister who didn't understand business. You were wrong. Emily understood systems. She understood patterns. And she understood you. I took a breath. The truth had to be spoken. Finally. The call at 1 a.m. was not a ghost. Mark. It was a protocol. Emily wrote a program before she died. A dead man's switch, linked to the family trust accounts. She set a trigger. If unauthorized transfers exceeded $50,000, or if the beneficiary status was altered, the system would wake up. It would call me. It would use voice synthesis from her old home videos to deliver the alert code. The room went dead silent. Mark's face drained of color. Jessica put a hand over her mouth. She knew, I said softly. She knew what you were doing 7 years ago. That is why she was driving to see me that night. She wasn't tired. Mark, she was terrified. She had found the first withdrawal you made to cover your gambling debts. She was coming to tell me. And you called her on the road, didn't you? You screamed at her. You threatened her. Mark shook his head violently. No, I didn't mean to. The phone records from that night were sealed. I interrupted him, but Emily backed them up. I listened to the last voicemail you left her. Mark, 3 minutes before she hit the guardrail, you told her she would ruin the family. You told her she was worthless. Jessica began to sob, a jagged, ugly sound. Mum, stop. Please stop. I turned to my daughter. And you? Jessica, you knew. You helped him cover it up. You helped him hide the money because you needed capital for your own business. You traded your sister's memory for a real estate portfolio. I looked at the lawyers, who had stopped whispering and were now distancing themselves physically from my children. They knew a sinking ship when they saw one. My daughter did not die in an accident, I said, my voice devoid of warmth. She died because she was running from her own family, and even in death, she was smarter than both of you combined. She didn't haunt me with fear. She haunted me with the truth. I reached into my purse and pulled out the legal dissolution papers my new attorney had drafted. I placed them on the table. I am revoking the conservatorship. I am removing you both from the trust. I am reclaiming my life. Mark looked up at me, his eyes red and hollow. Mom, what will happen to us? I looked at him, searching for the little boy I had once held, but I found only a stranger in a suit. That is for a jury to decide, I said. I turned and walked toward the door. I did not look back. I did not offer them a tissue. I did not offer them forgiveness. Behind me, the room was filled with a silence so heavy it felt like the crushing depth of the ocean. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in bureaucratic destruction. I did not have to lift a finger. The mechanism Emily and I had triggered worked with ruthless efficiency. The district attorney's office did not care about family dinners or sentimental value. They cared about wire fraud and tax evasion. Mark was the first to fall. His partners voted him out on a Tuesday morning. By noon, his bio was erased from the firm's website. By evening, the shiny sports car he leased was being hooked up to a tow truck outside his penthouse. Jessica lasted 3 days longer. The state licensing board suspended her ability to practice pending an investigation into the commingling of client funds. The empire of smoke and mirrors they had built on my back collapsed, not with a bang, but with the quiet shuffle of legal paperwork. I sat in my lawyer's office as the judge signed the order. The courtroom was empty of drama. Just the scratching of a pen that restored my life to me. The temporary conservatorship was vacated with prejudice. I was once again the sole executor of the Vance estate. I controlled every stock, every bond, and every square inch of property. They came to see me one last time. They had no choice. Their accounts were frozen, their credit destroyed, and their legal bills were mounting by the hour. They arrived at the house in a taxi, humiliated. I met them in the sunroom. I did not offer them coffee. I sat in the high-backed floral chair, my hands folded on my lap, watching them stand like errant schoolchildren. They looked aged. Mark's suit was wrinkled, his tie loose. Jessica wore no makeup, her face pale and puffy. "Mom, we are losing everything," Mark said, his voice cracking. He did not sound like a venture capitalist anymore. He sounded like a frightened boy. "They are talking about prison time. Mum, for fraud? That is the statutory penalty for stealing $2 million from a secured trust," I replied evenly. We didn't steal it, Jessica cried out, stepping forward. We were borrowing it. We were going to pay it back once the market turned, Mom. You have to believe us. We never meant to hurt you. I looked at her. Intent is irrelevant to the law. Jessica, you forged signatures. You created false medical records to declare me incompetent. You didn't borrow. You looted. But we are family. Mark pleaded, falling to his knees. It was a pathetic sight. Doesn't that mean anything? Mom, please. Call the tell them you want to drop the charges. Tell them we have an arrangement. If you don't, my life is over. I watched him. I remembered the way he had looked at me across the conference table just weeks ago, calculating my expiration date. I remembered the way they had dismissed Emily's death as an inconvenience. You assessed me as a liability, I said. You calculated that I was worth more dead or incapacitated than I was alive and autonomous. You made a business decision. Now, the market has corrected itself. Mom, I am sorry. Jessica sobbed, tears streaming down her face. I am so sorry. For everything. For Emily. For Dad. For how we treated you. Please, just give us a chance to make it right. The apology hung in the air. It was desperate, terrified, and entirely selfish. They were not sorry for what they had done. They were sorry they had been caught. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden Emily used to tend. You want forgiveness, I said. My back to them? Yes. Yes, please. Mark whispered. I turned around and looked them in the eye. No. They stared at me, stunned. But why Jessica breathed. Because you didn't apologize to me, I said coldly. You apologized to the person holding the checkbook, and she is not interested. I pressed the intercom button on the wall. Mr. Henderson? I said to the private security guard waiting in the kitchen, please escort the trespassers off the property. As the guard appeared, Mark and Jessica looked at me with a horror that went deeper than financial ruin. They finally saw me. Not as a mother, not as a victim, but as the inevitable consequence of their own greed. I watched them be led away. I did not feel happy, but for the first time in years, I felt clean. The house was finally empty. It was not the expectant silence of a home waiting for guests, nor the heavy silence of a funeral. It was the absolute, sterile silence of a vault that has been sealed shut. I sat in the leather armchair in the library, a glass of water untouched on the coaster beside me. The legal battles were effectively over. The restraining orders were filed. The assets were secured. I had won the war. But looking around the room at the ghosts of my family history, I realized that victory in a civil suit looks remarkably like total isolation. I found myself staring at a photograph on the mantel. It was taken 20 years ago at a beach house we had rented in Maine. Mark was holding a fishing rod, grinning with the unburdened confidence of a boy who believes the world is his for the taking. Jessica was building a sandcastle, demanding that her father fetch more water for the moat. And Emily was sitting off to the side, reading a book, smiling not at the camera, but at something she had found in the pages. I touched the glass of the frame. Where did I lose you to? I whispered to the frozen images of Mark and Jessica. Was it the money? Or was it me? The question had no answer. Perhaps the rot had always been there. A genetic predisposition toward greed that I had failed to diagnose until it was terminal. Or perhaps they were simply weak people who had never been told no until it was too late. I thought about the concept of motherhood. We are taught that it is a boundless, unconditional state of being. We are told we must forgive our children everything because they are of our flesh. But what happens when the flesh turns gangrenous? Do you let it spread to the heart? Or do you cut it off to survive? I had chosen the knife. My mind drifted back to the phone call. 1 in the morning. That synthetic, ragged breath. Mum, check the red file. It was not a ghost. It was not magic. It was something far more profound. It was a daughter reaching across the void of death with the only tools she had: logic, code, and a deep, abiding, protective instinct. Emily had known she would not be there to save me, so she built a machine to do it for her. That was love. It was not the performative love of Mother's Day cards and birthday brunches. It was the hard, cold love of a soldier covering a retreat. I opened the top drawer of the desk and pulled out a fresh sheet of stationery. I uncapped my fountain pen. I felt the need to speak one last time, not to the lawyers, not to the judge, but to the children who no longer existed. I wrote for an hour. I wrote about the disappointment that felt like a physical weight in my chest. I wrote about the pride I once had when Mark graduated, and the joy I felt when Jessica sold her first house. I wrote about how money is just paper, but trust is the currency of the soul, and they were bankrupt. When I finished, I folded the letter. I did not address it. I did not put it in an envelope. I held it over the small brass wastebasket by the desk. I struck a match. "Goodbye," I said softly. I watched the flame curl the edges of the paper. I watched the ink turn to ash. There was no anger left in me. The rage that had fueled my investigation, the fire that had driven me to destroy their careers, had burned itself out. What remained was a crystalline clarity. I understood now that justice does not bring happiness. It brings balance. It resets the scales. But the scales are cold, and they are heavy. I looked at the clock on the wall. The second hand swept past the 12. It was 1 in the morning. I looked at the phone on the desk. I waited. My breath was shallow, my ears straining against the silence. I waited for the screen to light up. I waited for the vibration. I waited for the name Emily to appear one last time to tell me I had done well. But the phone remained dark. The room remained silent. The mechanism had completed its cycle. There were no more warnings to give, no more files to check. Emily was truly gone now, her mission accomplished. I was alone in the quiet dark, the only sound the beating of my own surviving heart. 1 month later, the pattern repeated itself. But the feeling was entirely different. It was exactly 1 in the morning. The phone on my nightstand lit up, the screen casting a harsh white glow across the duvet. The vibration hummed against the mahogany, a persistent, angry buzz that demanded attention. The caller ID did not say Emily. It read unknown. It was not my daughter. Emily was at peace now. Her code had executed its final command, wiped itself from the servers, and gone dormant. This call was from the living. It was Mark, perhaps calling from a prepaid phone outside a motel room he could barely afford. Or maybe it was Jessica, calling from a friend's couch, her panic likely fueled by cheap wine and expensive regret. I sat on the edge of the bed and watched the screen pulse. I did not reach for it. I did not feel the urge to hear their excuses or their pleas. I imagined Mark's voice, desperate and cracking, trying to leverage guilt one last time. "Mom, please pick up. I have nowhere to go. I am your son. I imagined Jessica's bargaining, the way she would try to sound reasonable while she was drowning. "Mum, just give me enough for a lawyer. I will pay you back. I promise." I let it ring. Once. Twice. 10 times. Then, the screen went dark. The silence that followed was not empty. It was complete. The next morning, I drove to the city to meet with the new board of directors. Julian sat at the head of the polished table. There were no family members present. There were only serious professionals, people who understood duty over entitlement. "The transfer is complete." "Eleanor," Julian said, sliding the final dossier toward me. "The Emily Vance Foundation is fully funded. The initial endowment is $42 million. I picked up the pen. It felt light in my hand, with a single signature. The family fortune was no longer a personal piggy bank for my children's vanity. It was now a fortress. The foundation was dedicated to protecting whistleblowers in the corporate sector. It was designed to help people like Emily, people who saw corruption and were too afraid to speak because they lacked the resources to fight back. Mark and Jessica were officially disinherited. The clause was ironclad. They received nothing: no trust fund, no real estate, no safety net. They were 35 and 33 years old, and for the first time in their lives, they were truly on their own. They would have to get jobs. They would have to pay rent. They would have to learn that actions have consequences that cannot be fixed with a wire transfer. I walked out of the office and into the bright, cold afternoon sun. I felt lighter. The heaviness of the past 7 years, the grief that had anchored me to the floor, had shifted. It was still there, but it was no longer a burden. It was a monument. I returned to the empty house in Blackwood Ridge. I walked up the stairs and into my bedroom. I stood before the full-length mirror in the corner. I looked at the woman staring back. Her hair was grey, her face lined with the roadmap of a difficult life. But her eyes were clear. There was no confusion in them. There was no fear. I thought about the children I had raised. I thought about the monsters they had become. And I thought about the daughter who had saved me from beyond the grave. I touched the cold glass of the mirror. "We did it," I whispered. "My children likely tell people that their mother went insane. They probably tell their drinking buddies that I was manipulated, that I lost my mind with grief. They can tell whatever story they want. I have the truth, and I have the peace of a quiet house where the phone no longer rings at 1 a.m. I turned off the light. The darkness was kind. I closed my eyes, knowing that when I woke up, the world would be exactly as I had made it. Some people only understand who their mother is when it is too late. Thanks so much for hanging out and listening to this story. I'd love to know where you guys are tuning in from. Drop a comment down below with your city or country. Let's get a conversation going. If you enjoyed the ride, please smash that like button. Hit subscribe on Nora Revenge Stories, and if you're feeling extra generous, hit that hype button to help push this video out to more people. Catch you in the next one.